what he is doing is he is exposing the limitations of the system. And he's showing if you're willing to go there, often it's very hard to stop a president from doing that. We have built up presidential power so much in the last few decades, forgetting the lessons of Watergate, that in the hands of someone who doesn't have internal guardrails, it's dangerous.
Our old friend, Julian Zelizer. He is the professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University, as well as new to Substack. He has a Substack that you should check out called The Long View. Julian, it's great to see you.
It's great to be with both of you again and doing it on this platform. It's terrific.
Thank you. Thank you. So, okay, let's just start with your historical viewpoint. How would you categorize Trump's first 100 days in office historically?
Turbulent, destabilizing, and I hate using the word, but I think we're in unprecedented territory. It's not an exaggeration. It's hard to think of a president who has upended so many things without facing an immediate crisis, and thrown so many institutions and policies into an unsettled area. And so that, combined with a very aggressive use of presidential power that even goes in many ways beyond where Richard Nixon was in the early 1970s. So that's a lot. And I think everyone is seeing how this unfolds, historians and others.
Julian, it is great to see you. And this is a conversation we had many, many years ago when I was at CNN and we were in the first Trump administration. I'm curious your thoughts, because Nixon is the only comparable in U.S. history. Are we in authoritarian territory in terms of all of this together, criticizing the Fed's independence, going after private universities, the judiciary, remaking the economy, all for the worse, and what looks like extorting money almost from law firms to the tune of nearly $1 billion right now in free work because he disagrees with how these firms have represented clients in the past. Is the better comp to an authoritarian regime around the world?
Well, look, we are still a democracy and our constitutional system is still in place and power is still fragmented if other institutions are willing to use it. But I think it's fair to say that he's even going beyond incredibly strong presidencies, and he's deploying tactics we have seen in autocratic governments, including trying to quash, voices that could be oppositional and really usurping the authority of other institutions, are trying to do that. So where this ends up, I don't know. But I do think that comparison is becoming fair every day. And I think that's why you're even seeing more conservatives now starting to express concern over issues like, deportation without due process. And so that is the fear. Again, I want to stress we are in a constitutional system, in a democratic system, but the tactics are more comparable to Hungary than to U.S. history.
Dave, I see your perplexed expression about that we're still in a constitutional democracy. And so, Professor, I mean, when he's defying court orders, when he's defying a unanimous Supreme Court, when he's clearly enriching himself in the presidency, when he's being lawless in other ways, how can you be so confident that we're still in a constitutional system?
Well, we still have Congress, we still have the Constitution, we still have many federal judges who are working very hard at this point to maintain the system and to respond to the system. So I'm talking about the structure. Am I confident or unsettled? I'm unsettled. And I've seen a lot, I've studied a lot. But what he is doing is he is exposing the limitations of the system. And he's showing if you're willing to go there, often it's very hard to stop a president from doing that. We have built up presidential power so much in the last few decades, forgetting the lessons of Watergate, that in the hands of someone who doesn't have internal guardrails, it's dangerous. So I certainly feel and understand the concerns very much, and it's a guarded optimism. We have gotten through very difficult periods. We reconstituted the country after a civil war. We reconstituted the country not in the same way, but certainly moved beyond the turmoil of the 60s and the turmoil of Watergate. So I have that in my mind. But I don't want to downplay what I think are the great risks and dangers that we are facing with a true erosion of some fundamental elements of our institutions, our values, our legal system that are right now taking place.
I'm old enough to remember the Obama years when Allison and I sat on the curvy couch of Fox News and constantly quoted the founding fathers because the Republicans did so at every opportunity. No whisper of that. Today, was the Constitution built to contain someone like Donald Trump, or is it not?
It is. I mean, this is exactly what the founders feared. We are watching it play out in real time. The danger that the founders saw was someone who amassed too much power, was a president that looked too much like a monarch. And the system was designed, and there are problems with the system, but it was designed to fragment power so that this couldn't happen. There were things they couldn't imagine, and there were things they could fear. This is certainly in the realm of what they feared. They did not want to build a system where one person had this much authority over the economy, had this much power over other institutions. So I think you're right. And that memory is interesting because it shows in part how conservatism has changed, where this is not front and center for the conservative movement, for the Republican Party, to watch something that is antithetical to our founding take place under the banner of the GOP.
Oh, I mean, when Dave and I were at Fox and Friends, it was all about how can Obama use executive action? Who does he think he is? A king? King Obama? And there'd be a graphic with like boink with like a gold crown on his head. And they have, I mean, Donald Trump has so eclipsed anything, that in terms of numbers that Obama has had tried to do. And, I think that when it comes to lawlessness, we often think about Richard Nixon. He's sort of the personification of the lawlessness in the White House. How does Donald Trump's presidency compare to what Richard Nixon did?
Well, at a minimum, they're on the same plane, meaning Nixon was someone who did elements of what we're seeing. He threatened the press either by trying to intimidate them or threaten regulatory action against papers like the Washington Post. He used or wanted to use the IRS to intimidate opponents. He didn't want to spend money that Congress had authorized, which is why we actually have laws now preventing or trying to prevent what President Trump is doing. So he was doing a lot of this, but there were differences. He still was operating within the traditional political system. Nixon still understood at some level or felt the need to hide the bad things he was doing rather than doing it in broad daylight, which is relevant because then it legitimates it in a way that Nixon never was able to do. And finally, not only was he dealing with a Democratic Congress, but he had a Republican Party that ultimately parts of the party broke off and said, no, we're done, including Barry Goldwater, who was one of the most conservative members at the time. But look, I studying Nixon, obviously, you can see traces of what Trump is doing. But like everything with President Trump, scale and scope is so much greater on many of these things that it's different. And I do think that there's an internal part of President Trump that's different than Nixon. He really doesn't care or feel bound by the system and is willing to break it and willing to take the risk of breaking it in a way that his predecessors never were willing to do.
Who's the Barry Goldwater this time around? You mentioned some conservative pushback. We talked about Lisa Murkowski earlier, Don Bacon from Nebraska. There's been some whispers of dissent, but not much. Who could be Goldwater this time around, or will it be?
That I'm pessimistic. Saying you're afraid, which is what Senator Murkowski said, is different than saying stop. And the thing about this, Republicans have power now to actually stop President Trump. They control Congress. They have all sorts of power, from funding and money to impeachment. And the fact they are supporting this is an act of will and they're making that decision. So who's the person who breaks? The partisan loyalty is so fierce within the GOP right now. It's hard to see. The speculation is, will Senator Thune, who's the majority leader, who's considered an institutionalist, will he crack at some point? But we went through this in the first term, and the answer was hemming and hawing, but rarely did anyone say stop. And we will see. This is a test of the GOP. It's not just a test of the administration or all of us.
John Thune breaks my heart. Allison and I talked at the very beginning of this administration, and he was where I put all my hope because I'm a big fan of John Thune. I'll be honest with you. I know the guy from my days in South Dakota. I find him an institutionalist. I find him a true conservative, someone who believes in the Constitution and the values of this country. And I have not heard a whisper from an otherwise principled man. I am devastated. Now, Mitch McConnell has spoken out, but he is now powerless, unfortunately. He has spoken out a number of times, just hasn't been echoed at all. John Thune has been a tremendous disappointment to many in the Republican Party today. I'm just curious, you teach this course, Divided We Stand, at Princeton. What do your students say about what's going on right now?
Well, many are unsettled and upset. You can imagine seniors. This is the same senior class, that age cohort that went through COVID, and they ended their high school time with also turbulence from the Trump administration and watching their world come undone. I think many feel that. Many are trying to do what they need to do to get jobs. But I had one student tell me the other day, we were having a discussion, and she said that it's incredible to be at a moment where she literally doesn't know what things are going to look like in her world in a year or two. And she started listing, will we have medicine? Will we have doctors? Will there be universities in place? Like, what's happening here? And I think they feel that. They're really actually interested in studying how did we get to this place and understanding it even more than in recent years. So I think they want to know. I think they're scared and upset. And at the same time, they're also remarkably durable people who want to figure out a way to move forward and make things better.
Professor, obviously the elite universities have been in the crossfire of Donald Trump. It's interesting. I mean, he wavers between bragging about going to an Ivy League and attacking Ivy Leagues and threatening their funding. And so at Princeton University, I believe your president has not capitulated in any way. So what will that mean? What does it mean at Princeton if millions of dollars dry up?
It's hugely impactful. Money's already drying up because of the cuts that have been made to research funding across the board from the NIH and other institutions. And what it means, scientists are either closing their labs or anticipating how they're going to have to close their labs. They can't hire people to work in what they're doing. We don't have a medical school, but we have a lot of scientific research taking place. And they're starting to think, well, maybe next year, these projects they've been working on a lifetime. It's not about just a few years, will come to an end. And you can't restart these kinds of projects. They end. And so that's the atmosphere. It's going to affect students. I mean, all of this, and I don't just mean at Princeton, all the university cuts ultimately will be the resources that students need for classes, professors, and all the equipment and facilities they have. All of this will fall on them as well. So if this happens, it's devastating. And obviously, the other issue which Harvard has now taken a stand on is what it means for the free flow of ideas and debate, which have been so important to our national dialogue and to scientific and intellectual discovery. That's being threatened right now. So that's why I think more university presidents, ours, but also now Harvard University and some others, are starting to say something and starting to mount a defense.
We talked with Arne Duncan, the former Secretary of Education under Obama, about this just a few weeks ago, and he said he'd like to see all these colleges band together. What can they ultimately do to fight back, though?
Well, it's obviously hard, and they do have the courts, and they're going to try that, I'm sure. They also have public opinion, and you never want to downplay that. When we have had bad leaders, what's very important is that people outside of that leadership circle make arguments, mobilize, and make it clear to politicians that there's an electoral cost to what they are doing. And, although we're talking about select universities, such as the one I work in, this is not only affecting universities already all over the country, red states and blue, but the plan is to keep doing this. And that will be crushing. So it's important, I think, to articulate the dangers and to give for journalists such as yourselves to really talk about what's happening, not in the abstract, but what does this mean if medicine that's being worked on for Alzheimer's will not go forward because of what the current administration is doing? That's the best defense. And obviously, wealthier universities can try to draw on resources, although it's going to be painful. The federal government funds these big projects for a reason. No donor can ever do something like that.
I actually have a daughter at the University of Chicago who stayed far away from all of this. She literally is trying to perform laboratory research to someday, they hope, cure cancer. They've run out. The funding has dried up, immediately almost been shut off at U Chicago, where again, they have stayed far away from these debates that Trump is targeting. So it is real. The cuts are draconian across the country. I'm just curious, when you look at the flooding of the zone has its brilliance, right? Because you can't concentrate on any one thing. The universities, the Fed, the judiciary, just to mention a few, the tariffs. If you were the Democrats, what one area should they concentrate on? Because you can't put out 9 fires at one time.
The economy. I mean, he's sent the economy with the tariffs already in a state of uncertainty and turmoil. He has brought back the threat of inflation, which is why he's so mad at the chairman of the Federal Reserve and wants him gone. And he has cut all this talk at the university is connected to the economy. He is literally cutting the economy, by undercutting we are in a knowledge-based economy era. That's where we will compete with China. And he is undermining our ability to compete with China. So on all fronts, Democrats should make it clear what this is going to do in the end to people's ability to pay for their homes, to pay for their food, to pay for their children. And they need to just focus on that again and again. And he will, by the turmoil he creates, keep reminding voters, if Democrats do this well, that the threat is real and it's not imagined.
So Professor, if there's no Barry Goldwater in the future, how have historically countries and the population gotten out of a situation like this? I mean, what I had heard, but you're the historian, is that when, an authoritarian government takes over, it's usually death of that leader or a violent coup that stops this. And so what does history teach us about how to regain the control?
Well, things that have been important within our democracy, obviously congressional control still matters. And I know it sounds like it should be far away, but we're not far away from a midterm. And it would matter if Democrats controlled the House and possibly the Senate. It will give them institutional authority, including dollar authority, and possibly impeachment authority that would be a threat to the president. Don't discount citizens. The civil rights revolution, which changed law, which broke the power of Southern Democrats and Republicans who were opposed to social justice for Black Americans, it happened because of people going into the streets, putting pressure on members of Congress, making it clear that the status quo was not tolerable. And we've seen this internationally too with different kinds of governments. People matter, and political pressure can really matter. And then finally, in our system, even though he is testing it, the courts are still there. And it's going to really, we're watching what Chief Justice John Roberts is going to do, and the 3 block really now of him and the 2 conservatives who are willing to break. What do they do? So there are pressure points, and I think we shouldn't discount them. That's what I'm still looking for, and that's what I think his greatest vulnerability. And President Trump's other vulnerability is himself. I mean, on the one hand, it's brilliant, his strategy of creating chaos and distracting you every turn of the page. You look at something else. That said, people don't like chaos and they don't like turbulence. You just know that from our own lives. And that's what he is defining himself around. And that can be a vulnerability, I think, in mobilizing voters. None of that is fail safe. None of that is meant to say, let's ignore the real dangers. But all of that has to be part of the toolkit that we use to stabilize our democracy.
And a reminder of how far we've moved, I guess, right. Amy Coney Barrett has now become a target of the right, an unfathomable thought for those on the left that thought she was far too right to even serve on the Supreme Court, and now has become a target of MAGA voters. Really an extraordinary development. And yes, John Roberts might be the most important man in the country today. On the flip side, all the energy is with AOC and, of course, Bernie Sanders, who are drawing massive crowds, 30,000 in LA, a 3-mile long line in California for their latest oligarchy tour stop. Is this the right message? Are they the right messengers to fight Trumpism?
At this point, I think Democrats can try lots of things. And so, I mean, I don't think when you're in the opposition, historically, the key is the person in power, not you. So strategically, there's probably something to a mix between that, between whatever the congressional leadership, Jeffries and Schumer, want to do, and even former presidents. I don't think it has to be a one-size-fits-all strategy. What they are doing, regardless of what people think of their politics, is they're tapping into the real frustration that does exist out there. They're mobilizing people. And so, kind of on the whole, I think that's good for Democrats. Is that, the next presidential candidate, or are we looking at the next Senate leader? I don't know, nor do I know if that's the best strategy for the Democrats. But what they're doing now is doing something. And the doing something was missing in the first few weeks. And that can only benefit not only Democrats, again, people who are concerned about the health of our democracy. It's not a liberal conservative fight right now. It's not are you a Republican or a Democrat? It's do you want a system that is rooted in that Constitution, where those constitutional principles hold and we don't have a tyrannical president? That's the question on the table, and different kinds of Democrats can draw on the frustration in different ways, and that still works.
But see, and here's what I mean, and I agree with you, because I'm not sure they are the right messenger. I mean, let me just give you an example, like Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, who went down and visited with the man who, well, this Maryland man, there needs to be more homework on, did he actually have gang affiliations? One thing we know is there was a protective order filed by his wife, several documented episodes of what appears to be spousal abuse. So I don't know if that's the right tactic, going down to El Salvador, meeting this man that we still don't know enough about. Or should they focus on the lawlessness, focus on the judges, and standing up for the Constitution rather than for one man that we don't know enough about?
I mean, the basic issue, though, is that's why we have due process. You know that before you deport the person. So it is a reminder of how far we have moved, that you deport someone to an El Salvador, and we don't even know. They don't know either. So I think I think the value of what the senator is doing, and people can debate, is it personalizes these issues. These are overwhelming issues for most people. And you can talk endlessly, I do, about due process and the Constitution. You can talk about a person, and there are risks with that. But the benefit is it's a real person. And I think even with a person's flaws and problems, they can understand. Many Americans, even Joe Rogan was angry about this, why you don't send them to some horrendous prison without knowing kind of even what you're doing, and actually admitting it wasn't the right person that you were sending to begin with. So I think that's what the senator's trying to do. Democrats are also trying to compete in this world. Chris Hayes has this book that we're focused. It's about attention and how do you get attention. And no one is as good as President Trump in getting and keeping attention. And I think Democrats are doing things like this to tell the story in ways that compel people to watch or listen or read. So again, I'm not giving you an answer, is it good or bad? But I think that's the logic, and those are some of the virtues of what he's doing.
And Dave, as we've discussed, I think it's very telling that there have been these town halls, even in deep red states, where people, sometimes wearing what appear to be MAGA hats, object to the lack of due process. Because if it can happen today to somebody who was here lawfully but may have some checkered something in his past, it can happen to you. And that's their feeling. I mean, I'm just sharing with you that that's what I mean, to what the professor is saying, this is about the Constitution, more than Democrats or Republicans. And somehow people are starting to get that, they're picking up on that.
I agree with you. Look, there are some instincts that Donald Trump has that are correct. Sometimes he wants you to go out and defend these supposed MS-13. He knows he has some decent political instincts. And if you take the bait in some cases, he does know where public perception lies in some cases. And oftentimes I feel like Democrats take the bait. Is this a moment, Julian, that Democrats need Barack Obama back on the stage? We haven't heard much from him.
I was thinking about that. I mean, we haven't heard from the former presidents. I think probably their concern is making themselves the story. And there's a little bit, Jim Carville he wrote an op-ed saying it was controversial. He said the best thing Democrats could do is just lay down and play dead right now and let this all be about President Trump rather than the Democrats. And obviously, if a President Obama is back, there's nothing that Trump likes more than a good adversary. So he would make that the focus. President Obama would be the focus. That said, there's also value to someone with the gravitas of Obama and the standing broadly in the Democratic Party. Back to what you said about AOC and Sanders, he has a very different stature. There would be something occasionally to hearing from him. And given the magnitude of what we're talking about, I would expect President George W. Bush, frankly, to be out there. I'd want to hear from him too. Let him talk about what the president is doing. Let him talk about what Republicans should do. All the presidents should be out there who are alive, defending the system they were the head of. And I don't think it should be Obama without and Clinton. They should all be talking about this. And if Bush did it, it would be very different. I know Trump would then say that's the old establishment Republican. You can anticipate what he's going to do, but a lot of Americans would still respect that, and it would carry a lot of weight to hear from them. This is not right. This is dangerous. Time to stop this.
I agree. There's strength in numbers for sure. If they were all to lock arms and come out and have some sort of event or press conference and talk about how this is a violation of the office of the presidency. We talked to David Axelrod a week or two ago, and he said exactly what you were saying, Julian, which is that, it's hard for Barack Obama to insert himself, or he's reluctant, I guess, to insert himself into the news cycle and talk about it. But then right after that, he did go to Hamilton College, and say, can you imagine if I did any of this? And Dave and I can imagine it, because again, on Fox and Friends, that was a hyper focus of anytime he did anything wrong, Fox would slice and dice him 6 ways to Sunday. And now, again, some of the things, the very issues that they took huge umbrage at are Donald Trump is doing 100 times over. Dave, are you ready for a moment of a dose of sanity?
Yeah. Real quick, as a historian, Julian, the Democrats are still lost in the woods. They're 29%, an all-time low, with no clear leader other than AOC or Sanders. 10 years from now, how will we look back on this moment, do you think? Because many feel this will give way to J.D. Vance or Donald Trump Jr., and this will continue. How do you think we'll look back on this moment?
Well, I know the question we're going to ask is where people stood at this moment. And that's something Republicans should think about. What did you do? That's the famous question of your kids asking, what did you do when you faced a moment when this democracy we love, left and right, Democrat and Republican, came under threat and the instability overwhelmed almost everything else? Did you stand up against it? Did you do something to try to stabilize it? Were you the answer in the end to making the system better? But it would, again, be foolhardy not to imagine this can't get worse. The precedent is now set. The processes are underway, but I don't want to predict where we will be because I don't think that's settled. And I think those who are not comfortable with where we are can't think that way because the alternative is what they need to focus on. And we have a lot of history in this country where the institutions have actually worked and where we've done many good things. And that's, that's what many Republicans have talked about. So let's do it now. And let's see kind of as a nation how we can create, again, that kind of stability that's so essential to governing and to a healthy nation.
Yeah, I see so many people who are going to be on the wrong side of history, but that's cold comfort right now. Like,
Right.
I don't want to have to wait 10 years to be proven right that they're on the wrong side of history, but I take your point. So, Julian, what we do with all of our guests is ask them for a dose of sanity. How, as a historian and as a professor who has to deal with his idealistic students feeling completely like demoralized, what do you do to stay sane?
I watch the Knicks, who are doing well, and I don't watch the Jets, who didn't do well. Dave will remember our conversations. What do I do to be sane? Look, I am a historian, and I am ultimately a believer in understanding things is empowering to navigating through difficult times. And so I continue not only to study and write about it, but to teach my students. To have those conversations for me is incredibly, in these moments, rewarding. And often what I find when I'm talking to them, they're inspiring. They know exactly what's going on. They do feel disillusioned, but they don't feel defeatist. And that's always remarkable to me. They are thinking of their lives. They're not giving up their ambitions and dreams, and they're not giving up what they do believe in the country. So the process of teaching for me is where I get that dose of sanity and I get that dose of confidence every day. And all you have to do is meet with young people, and you'll meet enough of them. I think many people will come away feeling that way.
That's inspiring.
Unfortunately for Jets history, I think the future looks very similar for you, unfortunately, my friend.
That I get. That's somewhat something I've given up on. That's the ultimate, right?
But
Yeah.
the Knicks get
worry,
in the playoffs this weekend, so that'll be fun.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Julian, thank you. This was wonderful. Thanks so much for popping on Sanity with us. It's great to see you and actually really inspiring to be able to rely on your students and their vision for the future.
Thanks for having me on.